So we have a staff presentation, and then we'll follow a review of the draft. Mr. Cotto.
Thank you, Chair Williams. We're here for a continued discussion on the medical cannabis dispensary ordinance revisions. Last time we were here, October 20th, I believe, we got direction, 10 different items, and that turned into 7 that actually were changes in the ordinance, and I'd like to go over that quickly. The first one had to do with locational requirements. Just to let you know right now, they are allowed in the C2 and CM zones on Outer State Street, on Milpas, on Cliff Drive and Cliff near Meggs, and prohibited within 500 feet of schools, parks, and other dispensaries, and also prohibited on State Street between 101 and Arriaga. And this will just be a quick look at the maps as they exist today. So this is the downtown area. The pinkish area here shows all the different areas where dispensaries are allowed. The brown is the prohibited on State Street. Greens, parks. The light green around is a 500-foot buffer around. Blue are schools, and similarly, light blue is 500-foot buffer.
Can you give us some orientation on what those cross streets are?
Okay, so this is State Street here as it runs up and down. You can tell because Stearns Wharf is right there. Highway 101 crosses right here. Carrillo Street is here. Mitchell Traina Street is up here, and Mission is way up here.
Thank you.
On Outer State Street, again, the pinkish area shows where they're allowed, covered up here by 500 feet from Mackenzie Park and Peabody School, and then going down De La Vina. Milpa Street, again, it's allowed from Canna Perdita basically all the way down to Indio Muerto, but they've got these buffers of the schools and parks. This is the Mesa. Here's Cliff and Meggs. So at the last ordinance committee, we got direction to prepare an ordinance that had a cap of 7 located in each of 7 geographic areas: Outer State, De La Vina, Mission, Downtown West, Downtown East, Milpas, and Mesa. And we're supposed to return to you with some maps, which I have. Now, the ordinance language is pretty generic. We just put something in there so for discussion purposes, and we hope to get some clarification from the ordinance committee on what those geographic areas should be. So here we have a map similar to the last one, except here we have the 7 areas outlined in green. So this is the Outer State Street area, De La Vina, Mission, Downtown West, Downtown East, Milpas, and Mesa. And so for a little detail, here's downtown. Okay, so what I did, and I didn't quite get direction to do this from the ordinance committee, but I did it anyway for discussion purposes. I drew radii this time of 500 feet from schools and 1,000 feet from schools. So you can see that there's 2 rings that go around all the schools. I left parks at 500 feet, and I added a few things. I added Casa Esperanza. I wasn't able to get a list of all the different recovery facilities, but I added that and put a 1,000-foot radius around it. I added Girls Inc. I added the Sunken Gardens, which is kind of in here, and I added the Mission Community School, which is at 7 East Mission. And so based on these radii, I came up with these yellow areas. And you can see kind of underneath the old pink area is still showing up, and the yellow kind of shows where we thought that might be a good thing. Appropriate locations is what I mean when I say a good thing. So here's Downtown East and Downtown West. To orient you, State Street is where the green line is. The freeway is here. Carrillo Street is here. So west of downtown, we're talking about basically mostly the Chapala corridor, a little bit on De La Vina, Carrillo, and then a few of the cross streets as they go down.
And why wouldn't the yellow be also east of State, where it's now pink outside the radii of the park?
Well, okay, so let's talk about this, because looking at these radii, there's only a few areas that are left. right? If you take out all the prohibitions. This is the area that is clearly outside any prohibition area. Everything else seems like it's in something, or it's just one or two parcels here and there. And I couldn't get a full block face out of it, so I omitted those for discussion purposes. And I also cut it off I didn't show the upper part of the downtown east because that was fully covered when you put up these radii as well. But we can look at it back on the citywide map. So this is what I came up with, and you can see that it reduces the areas because it takes out a lot of this area here that's closer to the residential.
And have you superimposed it all the applications on these maps at all?
Yes.
Great.
So we have the application. There's one here. There's you know what? The way I did this map, I didn't quite do it. But the pharmacy is right in here. There's an application 826 Delavina Street here. One at 430 Chapala Street, which is right here.
And where is which application is in that park radii?
This one here. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's 100 East Haley. That's an existing non-conforming. Yeah, I apologize about that. I forgot the ordering of the maps is important, and I didn't do that. It was a little bit rushed. Now, in the Milpas area, when I drew this map, I didn't have the 1,000-foot radius around Casa Esperanza, which is this parcel right here. But it goes all the way up to about this area. And I can show you that on the citywide map as well. But basically, when you put in the 1,000-foot radius, you leave the 300 block of Milpas. And even part of those are covered by 1,000 feet from this school here, whose name Franklin School. But trying to stay with a complete block face, I just made that whole thing available for now.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Cotto, and just I know that you put the 1,000 feet in there, but I was looking real quick and also in my memory as to where that came from the schools, from the one from Casa Esperanza I remember,
Correct.
But I don't remember the recommendation.
We didn't make a recommendation.
The ordinance committee did not make that recommendation.
I see. So there would be, for instance, in the area there on Milpas, that section just below your. Yeah, right in there.
Here.
That would be yellow otherwise, right?
Yes, without the 1,000-foot, that would be yellow.
And
up until that point here, which is 1,000 feet from.
And that's where it runs in. Okay.
Yeah, 1,000 feet from.
And on the previous slide, if you could put that back up for
go back.
the one
here.
there you are. I'm looking at the language that we have in here. Where is the Salvation Army?
The Salvation Army is
right there.
Right there.
And would that be considered a legally permitted
facility?
homeless shelter facility?
Okay, so I'll have to ask you for some clarification in the ordinance committee, because the way the ordinance is written, it talks about homeless shelters, but I thought the ordinance committee said recovery facilities like alcohol and drug rehabilitation sorts of places. And there is one at Casa Esperanza, but obviously it's a homeless shelter as well. And
Yeah, we were speaking specifically about that kind of recovery thing. So anyway, we can talk more about that when we get there.
I made a call to the Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, CATA, I think, and asked for a listing. I did not hear back from them, and I didn't follow up. So that's still to be added to this list. I mean, to the maps.
I think our focus was specifically on what was called, like a construct, the recovery zone around Casa Esperanza. That was what we were discussing last time. And that was
yeah, we only made a determination.
And the 1,000 feet had to do primarily with the way that the freeway and all the other stuff. We can talk more again as we get there.
So that was a misunderstanding on my part. Anyway, I'll just continue through the maps.
And can you articulate where the current non-conforming and where the current not on the downtown map, the east side map?
Yes. So 500 North Milpas, the one that's almost open, is right here, and 331 North Milpas, the one that is open and permitted, is right here. Oh, maybe it's this long one, but it's in this block that would be allowed even under the 1,000 feet. Now, something that came up, or something that people have requested, was to add to the list of types of uses that were prohibited, including daycares and things like that, and I did not do that. I just kept it with the K through 12 schools and parks. Now going to Outer State Street, this isn't much different. Again, here's State Street here. This is La Cumbre, Hope. Oops. And the main difference is, well, essentially there is not a whole lot of difference in the Outer State Street, except these two parcels here in the old maps are not allowed, just because of the way the ordinance was written. These two parcels are zoned CP, and they don't front on State Street. So in the current ordinance, these two parcels aren't allowed, and they're just as good as any other parcel in this area. They're far away from everything. So I propose to add those back in. Everything else is pretty much as before. And there is there's two non-conforming dispensaries. One's off this map over here, but oh, sorry, no, one of them's about here. And then the other one's about at Ontaire, right about there. This is the Delavina area, which is, in the current ordinance, it's all sort of considered the same as Outer State Street, but we split it up into two different areas. And basically from Constance to Kylerellis here. And before, the Ralph's Shopping Center was not included because it was zone CP. But if we take just all the parcels up front on Delavina Street, that would be all these parcels here. And then Mission, this is a newer area. It used to be just part of downtown. But I took the Mission School and drew a 1,000-foot radius around it. 500 feet would be about here, probably. And then this area was left over. I mean, this would be the area that would be the Mission area, at least in the way I've drawn these maps so far. And the 2 West Mission dispensary is basically right there.
But it's already within 500 feet if you consider that a school.
Correct. And just a little bit of update. The Planning Commission had a motion to reconsider that.
Right.
Oh, I don't know if you know, but the motion did not pass.
So at a 3-3 deadlock, it is not going forward.
Correct. It is continued to be revoked. And again, here on the Mesa, again, I drew the 1,000-foot radius. That's 500 and 1,000 feet from Washington School. So for this purpose of discussion, I just excluded these areas and left it in the Mesa Shopping Center. And that's a little vegetable produce stand.
Okay, again, so for you, please, Mr. Cotto, if I may.
Yes.
On the lower right-hand side, where the 500-foot radius just clips that area right there. If I'm not saying something's going to be provided there, but let's just say somebody wanted to provide something on that parcel, but outside of the 500-foot radius. How do we look at that? If the actual physical structure is 500 feet away, but the parcel itself goes into the 500-foot, what do we do with that kind of thing when that happens?
The way the ordinance is written right now and would continue to read is it's from parcel line to parcel line. So if this line here that's the 500-foot radius from a parcel line, the school parcel line, touches this parcel, then it's out.
I see. Okay.
Now, this particular parcel happens to be a veterinary hospital. I kind of don't think they're going anywhere, but that's the way we handle it.
Okay. Dog patients.
Mm-hmm. And cats. Okay, so again, this is for discussion purposes. We didn't have exactly what you wanted. We didn't have exactly what you wanted or how you wanted to go about this. So this is for discussion purposes, and we can amend it to however you want. So there's a whole bunch of current operational restrictions, and the Ordinance Committee wanted to add some. The direction was to give more discretion to the staff hearing officer by changing some of the approval criteria. A prohibition on dispensaries in existing mixed-use buildings with residential condos, and allowing non-conforming dispensaries, if there were any, in those types of buildings to exist without an amortization period. Annual review by the police department and the staff hearing officer or community development department staff. Licensed security guard working for a separate company with an office in Santa Barbara. proximity prohibition of 1,000 feet from Casa Esperanza. And again, this is a point of confusion on my part, because I said I thought it was other recovery facilities like that, and it sounds like that wasn't the point. So I apologize about that. Reducing the amortization period for existing non-conforming dispensaries to 6 months. And I took that to mean the 4 that pre-existed the current ordinance, and I wasn't sure. I'm not sure we're sure how you want to handle those ones that were permitted pursuant to the current ordinance, but then would become non-conforming to the revised ordinance. There's going to be 2 sets of them, and we know what to do with one set. I'm just not sure what to do with the other set. The appeals would continue to stop at the Planning Commission. Don't expand to the Cottage Hospital area or Coast Village Road. Don't create a Highway 101 exception. I thought I heard that, but I'm not sure. It is actually written into the ordinance that way. But again, that could be a...
You actually had included in here that the freeway was a barrier that kind of truncated the restriction area.
Right, that's how it's written in the proposed ordinance. I'm just not sure if that's what the ordinance committee actually wanted. I have a little bit of contrary notes that way.
Thank you.
And then discuss the dispensaries versus collectives, which happened last Tuesday night. And this list, which I also showed last Tuesday night, has changed a little bit in that the Green Light Dispensary at 631 Olive Street has pulled their building permits. That's the only change. And 2 West Mission was revoked, and the motion to reconsider failed. Everything else on this list is still the same. And that concludes my presentation. I'm definitely here to answer questions and get some more direction.
Mr. Francisco looks like he has a question.
Did we say that we didn't want this to be appealable to City Council?
Yeah, we concluded that we didn't want to change that because the amount of, for a variety of reasons. But I also think that that's probably, I'm not even sure that it's, at this point.
Because my feeling on it is given some of the things that get appealed to City Council, and given the policy implications of this particular zoning issue compared to a lot of others, that this is the kind of thing that you do want to be appealable to City Council, because policy considerations and balancing community needs will probably come into these kinds of things more often than your typical neighbor dispute.
We probably should handle questions before debate.
Sure.
I think the conclusion of last time was that if we do our job right with this ordinance, that's the policy consideration. And if we do our job with changing to the collective model, that's the policy consideration. And that we don't no other reoccupations of commercial space is discretionary for any other category. You don't need permits to locate any other zone for use in the entire city. And so having appeals for zone 4 uses that don't require any modifications to the city council would be kind of a big precedent, would be the other part of it. And I'm not sure that that it's a good idea to have every chimney appealed to city council.
And talk about that one.
So other questions on this? I did have a question. I was looking at the language for security, and it wasn't. And I realized that there is actually a difference in state law between a private party operator security and a in-house. I don't know what the proper term is, and that the in-house does not have to do a background check, whereas the private party operator does have to do a background check. And I thought that was an important distinction. Have you looked at that at all?
Chair Williams, a little bit. There are about 2 or 3 different levels of security guard certifications through the state, and I didn't do a lot of research into who needs to do a background check or not. I didn't think it was that important because anyone who's associated with a dispensary from our ordinance requires a background check.
Even if they're a in-house security because they're employed by the collective.
Correct. And I thought, I heard the ordinance committee say that the ordinance committee didn't want in-house security. They wanted a separate entity
Right.
company
For-
that is
for-
providing the security.
Yes, and I think if we actually want that, we should we're going to have to change the language a little bit, but but so I just bring that up as an issue. Any other questions from the committee? Mr. House.
Mr. Cato, would you show us where in our ordinance, the proposed ordinance, that we're referencing state law? I see on page 2 a reference to Health and Safety Code, section 11362.7a, in the middle of D, and I just wanted to see where where, if at all, we're referencing the requirements that the state has for under Proposition 215 and Senate Bill 420.
I think that's in the approval criteria. If you go to page 13, B1, the first criteria for issuance is that the dispensary permit is consistent with the intent of state health and safety code for providing medical marijuana to qualified patients, et cetera.
Got it. Okay, very good, very clear. And then I found another one on page 3 where it talks about what a qualified patient is and refers, and then another above. So we're using, okay, good. So we're referencing this. I see a few places now in the definitions where we're referencing the California Health and Safety Code. Okay, and I found another. Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the committee? Then we'll take public comment. We'll limit it to 2 minutes unless you absolutely have to talk a little bit longer. And we'll start with...
Can we focus on the changes?
Yes, please focus on the suggested changes. I mean, we want to make sure that this draft is as bulletproof as possible. I actually do have one more question, Mr. Cotto, because this is something that, and it may be a question for you or it may be a question from the city attorney. As I understand it from our examination of the collective model, that we can regulate through zoning, and we can do any number of things up into a moratorium or anything else on storefront collectives, but that we do not have the ability to regulate collectives that don't have a location, which means that it's really people operating a collective out of their home. Is that, that is what I took away from the last hearing, and I wanted to make sure that members of the public understand that, if that's the case.
Mr. Chair, yes, I think that's a correct statement, that my reading of the SB 420 statutes in particular provide that if a group of individuals organize a cooperative or a collective and do not retail, and I know, that can mean different things to different people, but essentially I think that's the essence of your question. If they do not retail, they do not have some location that is open to the public that can, on a walk-in basis, they would probably be consistent with state law and beyond the sort of thing that the city can regulate. And it really gets to the question of zoning model versus cooperative model. And, here we're talking about the zoning model, and that's essentially retailing.
And Mr. Cotto, do you have the ability at all, while we do public comment, to have anybody in the community development department to do a 750 map at all? Because you did 500 and you did 1,000, but it was really hard to figure out the scale between those two. Is that possible or just not logistically possible to do?
It's probably not logistically possible.
Okay.
But what I could do is, because I have drawn those radii on a map, I just don't have it. You have to export it and all kinds of stuff. But I could, the Those maps are available on the website, actually.
Oh,
I
so
have a
could
map
we
that shows
just have somebody, print out that map on the website and bring it to us or something like that?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or put it up while we're doing public comment, something like that.
I'll get something to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cotto. So we're starting with Bill Lee, followed by Maria Dumont, and we're going to keep to 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Leahy, and I'm speaking as the General Manager of the Pharmacy Santa Barbara. The pharmacy's clinical director, Joanna LaForce, is unable to be with us today, so I have submitted a letter to all of you on her behalf, and I'd like to recite a few points that I have here. As you know, the pharmacy permit was approved, but was appealed. And the appeal has been continued pending the outcome of this committee and the action by the City Council. The pharmacy's model conforms completely with the California state law and the California Attorney General's guidelines as a not-for-profit collective, as do our collective storefront dispensaries that distribute medical cannabis to our members. We are supportive of regulation. We are pleased to see the Ordinance Committee continuing to move through the task of clarifying the ordinance. We feel that clear and consistent regulation of Santa Barbara's collective dispensaries is the most reliable method for providing the safest access for Santa Barbara's medical cannabis patients and security to Santa Barbara as a whole. The last time the Ordinance Committee met, it was resolved to recommend removing the mixed-use building with condos at appropriate locations under the ordinance. It was also resolved to recommend a cap and quadrant restrictions. Should both these recommendations, without further modifications, be adopted by the City Council, the pharmacy, due simply to bad timing and through absolutely zero fault of its own, will likely lose its opportunity to serve the needs of the Santa Barbara community. This is completely unjust and unfair. We currently have 223 Santa Barbara County patient members who feel strongly enough about the pharmacy that they travel to Los Angeles to gain their medicine from the pharmacy collective dispensaries there. Patients who deserve safe access from their collectives closer to their homes. We have done everything that the city has asked on the schedules required to be able to provide such services. We urge consideration of the following 3 recommendations. 1, grandfather current pending permit applicants who are disqualified or prejudiced by any change in the ordinance. The applicant ought to be able to maintain the original date its application was deemed complete.
Bill, you're going to have to wrap up here.
Okay. Choose. Can I just say I got 2 things? That's all. Choose an alternate site without losing their permit hearing priority. 2, convert to an RFP process of selection so that the city has more control over approval of the model and quality and experience of permitted collective dispensaries from this point forward. And last 3, reconsider the proposed number quadrants. Though cap are certainly needed, increasing the number of quadrants through splitting the larger quadrants in 2 will have the dual effect of providing more options for pending applications while distributing approved facilities more evenly throughout the appropriately zoned city areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to give you a warning, guys. I'm going to have to start cutting people off right at 2 minutes. We have speakers that if we all take the 3.5 minutes that Bill just did, we won't get anything done today. So Maria Dumont, followed by Jeff Rowland.
My name is Maria Dumont. I'm a resident of Paseo Chapala. I'm just going to ask one thing from you, is that please consider that any existing mixed-use building that are condominium, like my case and my neighbors, be totally excluded from conforming, non-conforming, pending, approved, waiting appeal, because we had no way to change our CCNRs. So please don't forget us. That's basically what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Jeff Rowland, followed by James Lee. And Jeff, I want to appreciate all your correspondence with us.
Yeah, I actually have for you guys, if you don't mind. I will use less than 2 minutes, I promise. Good afternoon. Good to see you again, yet again, on this topic. Keep my comments brief. As you know, I'm in support of most of the recommended ordinance changes. I emailed you guys yesterday with this spreadsheet, which you see there. I've actually made another update to it. So I'd just like to reiterate that, you know, in particular, what affects me is the mixed-use condominium buildings. I think that's a good move. And then in general, I'd just like to state, you know, I am in support of compassionate care and, you know, people having access to medical marijuana. But if you look at the spreadsheet, I don't really expect you to do it now. If you look at all the other states in California that have ordinances, what you guys are proposing is extremely generous. I'm not really sure how else to say it. But based on the numbers in terms of averages, based on populations of cities, and I actually had another column based on land area of cities, and that information is from the U.S. Census Bureau. What you guys are proposing is well over at least double the average of other cities in terms of numbers of dispensaries available here in the city. I would really strongly suggest that you consider something more in the order of 4, which would be in line with what other cities are doing based on these numbers. I'm also a little bit confused because I've been at all these meetings and I don't recall, and I may be recalling incorrectly, that you directed the planning department to look at 7 zones. We were at 4 zones when that meeting happened. I'll look at the tapes. I think you guys talked about a cap. You didn't talk about increasing the number of areas in the city. So you've done a little wrangling here by going to 1, but then increasing the number of areas to 7. So I think 7 is too many. There's a lot of access in the city. The second sheet there is a photocopy of an ad that's in the Independent. It's in here all the time. You can have marijuana delivered to your door in Santa Barbara, so there's plenty of access. You can also get approved online by that company. If you look in the Independent, just a few pages from your ad, Mr. House, you'll see every week there's an ad for at least 1, if not more, of these places. So there's plenty of access here in the city. Thank you.
James Lee, followed by Nathaniel Rinke.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is James Lee. Thank you for your work on the ordinance in the past several weeks, and thank you, City Attorney, for your draft on the latest revision. Earlier in the discussions about what changes to make, there was a point made about raising the age limit from 18 to 21, and the attorney advised against that because 21 was a rather arbitrary age set from back when Prohibition ended. But based on all the discussions and public comment that we've heard over the past few weeks, I'm pleased to share with you that my business partner and I, we voted and decided to make an internal decision to limit our dispensary facility to access to 20 and over. So if your age ends in 18 and 19-year-olds are no longer going to be welcome or registered to our collective at the dispensary at 500 North Memphis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Nathaniel Rinke, followed by John Campanella.
Afternoon, Chair and committee members. A couple points of interest. First off, you had discussed limiting operation hours of the dispensaries, and the staff hearing officer has been imposing a limit of 10 in the morning to 7 in the afternoon, evening on recent applicants, permitted applicants. And also, I noticed there's a change in the ordinance, changing from 500 feet of a permitted dispensary to 1,000 feet of a permitted dispensary. And I want to know how that will be handled. Is that going to be a legal nonconforming issue, or what's going to happen with that? As well, do independent contractors need to have background checks? Do accountants need to have their background checked? Do lawyers need to have a background check? Things like that. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, Mr. Weston and Mr. Americana probably don't need background checks, but Mr. Campanella, followed by Heather Bowitt.
Good afternoon, John Campanella, owner of a Paseo Chapala unit. I'm also head of the Association of the Office Residential Owners. Just clarification before I start. I think number 2 is a mixed situation because I'm pretty sure that we're not allowing dispensaries in existing mixed-use condominium buildings, But I think the second part of that sentence refers to non-condominium mixed use, which is only one incident in town, I believe. So it's looking like, even though it's not allowed, they're going to be allowed in a mixed-use building. I think that has been, I'll check with Mr. Cato, but I think that's been incorrectly stated. That second phrase doesn't really apply to the existing mixed-use buildings, I believe. Okay. I submitted just some clarifications or some questions for you to consider on the current drafting. One would be on the definition of a mixed-use development. Using the word parcel has been confusing. The pharmacy was confused because they felt they were a parcel, a separate parcel, because they're a condominium. I'd like to recommend taking the word parcel out and instead say within a mixed-use residential use condominium project that exists at the time of the adoption of the ordinance. And I submitted that to you for consideration. Secondly, the dispensary currently, the primary purpose has to be to dispense medical cannabis to be covered by the ordinance. I suggest maybe you revisit that, because what does primary mean? Is it square footage? Is it revenue? Is it income? I think what you don't want to do is have a significant part of the operations that you can't control not be covered by the ordinance and no security. Thirdly, definition of authorized and permitted, just some suggestions to show what the instances are where something is finally approved, whether it's appealed, it isn't appealed, or there's some type of legal review that's required. Lastly, picking up on what Member Francisco said, I think it should be appealed to the City Council. I mean, there are a lot of questions that come up and nuances, and Planning Commission a number of times are really told by City Attorney's Office to just focus on one item. There's really no latitude. And I think as these questions come up and you start evolving this policy, I think it does good to get the Planning Commission, that is the body that actually approved this in the first place, and are the elected officials. So I would recommend that for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campanella. Heather Poet, followed by Derek Weston.
Good afternoon. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone on the Ordinance Committee and Steve Wiley and everyone who's been working really hard on this ordinance. Have been a lot of things that have come up and changed, and I appreciate all the hard work that everyone is doing as a dispensing collective here in Santa Barbara. I just really quickly wanted to encourage that it be introduced into the new ordinance that an RFP be the way that you go for looking at what you want in the city. I think it's a great idea. I think that the proposal was significant, and I think that it allows each dispensing collective to be able to compete on their merits, and I think that that's really important. I understand that there are only now, with a cap of 7, that you're looking for the best, and you only want those that are legitimately trying to provide safe access to patients. So I think that that's a really good way of going about it. I also think that everything that you've been doing so far with the zoning does make sense. But I just wanted to encourage you to think about including the language that was in the proposed ordinance of the citizens group to make the RFP part of that, because I think it could be really useful for you, and it would be able to you wouldn't have to deal with some of the other problems. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Ms. Poet. Derek Weston, followed by Bonnie Raisin.
Hi, my name is Derek Weston on behalf of Santa Barbara Patients Group. 2 brief points. You could at least consider changing the word dispensary and using a term of art in this ordinance. It's become kind of a bad term in this context, and you might want to specifically define a term like a qualified dispensing provider and then just use that acronym to always refer to it. It wouldn't make any substantive difference, but it might help make it clear to the public what you're trying to achieve. I do want to raise just one other point. Contrary to what I thought a little bit earlier this morning, I see that the definition of permittee in Section E has now added the requirement that the permittee be a primary care provider. And that is a significant decision. The patients group could qualify in that category by making it clear that that is the role they serve with respect to their patients. However, I think it is a narrower interpretation than state law. If you look at section 11362.765, which it lists 3 categories of individuals that are exempt from criminal liability. The first is the patients themselves. The second is primary care providers. And the third category is, and I'm now quoting most of the language, any individual who provides assistance to a qualified patient or a person with an ID card or his designated provider in administrating medical marijuana to the qualified patient or person acquiring the skills necessary to cultivate and administer marijuana for medical purposes. So by including in this subsection E the definition that a permittee, a dispensary, has to be a primary caregiver, that does not make it possible to qualify under this third category. So I'm not sure that I have heard a discussion of why that was added. It's not a deal killer in our case because we could qualify, but I'm not sure the restriction is necessary or appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weston.
And then I had just a very brief language question. I'm not sure the syntax on E is correct. The permittee to whom either, and I'm not sure the either ever ties into anything, so you might take a look at that, Steve.
You pesky attorneys and your syntax errors. Bonnie Raisin, followed by Patrick Waddell.
I'm Bonnie Raisin. Thank you for having this meeting and giving us once again a chance to state our views, although I feel that my talks have reached the point of mantra because I am so opposed to the designation of 7 that you proposed. And I thought I understood Mr. Williams to say last week that he thought the Oakland model was a good model. They have 4 with a population that's 3 times the size of Santa Barbara. So I don't know what happened to that. I know any hopes of a moratorium has gone by the wayside. If Santa Barbara, and as I view it, a perfect world, had district elections, we wouldn't even be having this, or district representation, excuse me, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. The West Side booted out, got rid of the dispensary that was causing, or excuse me, the marijuana outlet that was causing so many problems. That would have been a district. The way it is now, we have 7 scattered around throughout what looks like to be on the east side of the freeway. And there are sober living homes. An exact count I don't have. I doubt even if CADA would have that. But I know through Casa Serena and the Bethel House and the Rescue Mission that could probably come up with that. And they are all around. Without knowing where they are because they don't advertise. Jennings House is very near Casa Esperanza. It's a recovery home for women. Casa Esperanza has a recovery program. They do the best they can to get committed people who are committed to sobriety into sober living homes. And sometimes they go to the Salvation Army, which also has a recovery position or recovery program. So, I, first of all, would like to just clarify what I'm trying to say, and that is I don't think 7 is an appropriate number, once again. Schedule 1 with the American Medical Association still considering marijuana as an illegal drug, that is in the works of being reframed, redone, relooked at throughout the country. So, it just seems to me that in the meantime, it would be prudent to scale way back. And I know this isn't directly related to
Bonnie,
the information on
over a minute
the overhead, but I feel very strongly that you've gone ahead without any consideration for what I thought in good faith was going to be a reduction in the medical marijuana outlets. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, you guys started off so good. And then you guys started just pushing the time a little bit farther each time. So please keep to 2 minutes. Patrick Waddell, followed by Tony Vassallo.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you for the work you've done on this. I know you put a lot of time into it, and your hearts are and minds are in the right place. I would like the committee to consider the cause and the effects again, that since we're moving to a nonprofit collective type of model, what the effects are going to be. And what we're going to see is spillover. I don't want to be a Cassandra, but I just would like you to consider this in the back of your mind. I understand the ordinances are very complex, and one of the things was to limit the ordinances. That's why sometimes these things are so complex. But at a certain part, there's going to be a spillover. Yeah, if you have to get security, you're going to have to spend up to $24 an hour, or their bonding might not allow it. So essentially, the main concerns were that the children were getting it, or that seemed like one of the concerns. And when people are having their own collectives and cooperatives, and there's preemption under state law, they're going to be growing it in their backyards, in their houses. There's going to be an oversupply of it. Kids will get it that way, as opposed to a storefront location. Also, I'd like you to consider opening up the manufacturing funk zone areas. They, regardless if you add another dispensary or not, those are out of sight. They're less disturbing to people, and with the other selections, they'll be available if people aren't comfortable going into those zones. Also, I'd like clarity of law. I don't want to see the city with too many lawsuits. So if perhaps incorporation of state law, so these matters can't be sued and multiple appeals. And needless, the city council has spent enough time on this, so I don't think it's appropriate for them to be appeals. And also clarification on delivery services for access limited individuals and individuals with disabilities, ADA and state counterparts, to get their medication and to be included in cooperatives and collectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Tony Vasallo, followed by Sharon Byrne.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'll run through these points quickly. The Casa Esperanza clause, I think, should be applied to all special needs facilities. Otherwise, you're discriminating against places like Salvation Army and other places that house and place people in recovery. Secondly, it seems to me that if in the ordinance you make a distinction that a dispensary process is discretionary by sending it through your staff hearing officer with an appeal to the Planning Commission, and if you start that process, it seems that the decision should be handled in the same manner as any other land use decision and allow appeal to the City Council. Otherwise, why require a discretionary hearing at all? Thirdly, when I worked on the citizen revisions for the ordinance, we asked that the Brinkerhoff Historic Landmark District be eliminated from a site for location of a dispensary. It's over 70% residential, and it's high-density residential. And in conjunction with that, we asked that a buffer zone be placed around it because of the fact that the lower west downtown area has so many recovery facilities, such as Salvation Army. And we would just reiterate our hope that the cap be brought down to 4, as we recommended in the citizen version of the ordinance. And I think that covers it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Byrne, followed by Nelson. B. Nelson.
I actually want to, it's going to sound strange, but I want to back what Heather Poet said and request for the RP process to be implemented. As one of the people that helped pen the Citizens Revised Ordinance, I would like to see that adopted. I'd also like to see the language really crisped up around a cap of 4. I know we discussed 7 zones, but there's been talk between 4 and 7. Please keep it to 4. If you banned them entirely in the city of Santa Barbara, there are still 4 in the surrounding county near Goleta and 2 in Summerlin. So we have plenty of access. I don't think that's a question here. As we look at the maps, and I know Mr. Cotto is probably tearing his hair out at this point, it seems to me that it might be that the geography of Santa Barbara, especially when you start looking at schools and recovery facilities, may not lend itself to a downtown collective sided model. It just might not. If we were to map up recovery facilities along with schools there, you would start to see that the Salvation Army, the Lighthouse, the New House, Casa Esperanza, that there's quite a few recovery facilities. You asked earlier if Salvation Army is a recovery facility. It is. It's for people who have completed a program and just before they make that sort of final step out. So those are at-risk vulnerable populations. Our downtown corridor happens to be very full of those kinds of facilities. It's something that we might want to consider. I also would like to see the appeal to City Council be included in this ordinance. You hear all kinds of mundane land use matters. I agree. I think that if you do your job, you won't hear a whole lot of these appeals, but you will probably hear some, and it should not stop at the Planning Commission. I'd also like to see the provision about Department of Justice clearance for owners and operators incorporated into the ordinance. Thank you.
John Donahoe, or B. Nelson followed by John Donahoe.
Well, council people, I am very interested in what you mean by non-conforming. I'm interested in if they don't have to have business license like everyone else in Santa Barbara, if when they were open they were illegal, but now they're not illegal, and do they have to pay their bills like everyone else, or is that non-conforming? And I'm interested in when the one place they moved in, they agreed to pay 1/2 of water and gas. They never have. They pay it whenever they feel like it. I just think that if that's part of the non-conforming, and I would like that cleared. And other than that, I agree that we should have. I do think you're doing a good job. I think it's a hard job, and I think the laws just aren't being followed if they're made, and they should be. Other businesses have to conform and aren't given 6 months or 3 years to do it. So that's my concern. And it isn't being done, for sure.
Thank you, B. John Donahoe, followed by Hans Edwards, who's our last speaker.
Hi, John Donahue, Aloha Spirit.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. We are in the appeal process right now for a permit. We understand that there is another location that's under the same appeal process. We feel that ours is a little different than theirs, not to change the fact that we're in the appeal process. One of my big questions is, in the city council meeting, they were discussing a moratorium that would go for 45 days until you guys figured out if you wanted to do the collective or the cooperative or the storefront. Believe that everyone is going to the collective model. This is going to take longer than 2 minutes. As a collective, it's a collective of growers, people that are together, that are growing for each other and supplying people that cannot do the growing. That is exactly what we intend to be doing. There are definitely some kinks that need to be worked out, but we intend to educate the people that are the members. If they can't do it themselves, then the members that can will do it for those that cannot. The people that do the growing themselves will receive half of that plant for themselves at no charge. The other half of that plant will go back to the collective that will be used to pay the expenses, the electricity, the phone bills, and whoever's working there. So please keep an open mind, and maybe we can have some kind of sit-downs and talks where we can talk some ideas out on how we can tackle this problem. And my second thing would be just as far as the moratorium goes, I don't know if it was going to be for pending applications or all applications, even though we're in the appeal process. But I do urge you not to go down the moratorium road, as you can see what it has done to the Los Angeles area. And all you will do is have more delivery services. You'll have more illegal grows going on, which will bring a whole new wrap of problems. So thank you.
Thank you. Where our last speaker is Hans Edwards.
Honorable members of the Commission, Mr. Wiley and staff. My wife and I respectfully request that for those applicants who have followed all the rules, have done everything that they are supposed to do, have approached the community, and done everything correctly, we ask that the Commission propose that the ordinance be modified to allow the transfer of a permit in such cases as where the applicants, through no fault of their own, are in a situation where the permit location becomes untenable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. And it's to the committee. Does anybody want to speak first? I don't think I have any committee members that want to speak first. Mr. Cotto, do you have any maps? So since if I don't have any committee members that want to speak first, I'll speak first then. First of all, just to update people, we will have a hearing on a moratorium. What shape that moratorium will take will not be determined until after that hearing. We would have to act as that being a Brown Act noticed element of the hearing. So that is not this hearing. That would be a future hearing. We also are have been directed by the council to change our ordinances to conform with the collective model. And we are in the process of doing that. That will not be concluded today. But what we also determined at that hearing last week is that we don't want to hold off on making the changes to fix a fairly dysfunctional situation before we can make those changes. So we're close to it, and I think our intention is to try to make those changes. I personally, I think that the Oakland model is a good model, but we have to look at it in the context of what it is. In the context of what it is those four are like the size of small grocery stores, right? Okay, so we don't have places where we're going to have this, collectives the size of small grocery stores, and though I would be tempted to further limit the number, I know that would just be an illusion. A ban's an illusion. A limitation is an illusion because, as Mr. Cotto articulated so eloquently last week, any four stoners in any residential neighborhood in the city could form a collective and start, dispensing marijuana anywhere they want. And that's a problem because if we can only regulate the storefront model, then if we ban and limit too much the storefront model, then all we do is we encourage delivery services, the likes of which you provided us a record of, Mr. Rowland. That, in my mind, is really the problem, is because we cannot track or regulate those neighborhood-based collectives or delivery services, and that is, to me, a problem. So I think ultimately some of the fixes are needed in state law. I do have three requested changes to the language. One is under the security requirement. I think I already went into that a little bit. To me, I want us to conform to the highest standard of security that we can realistically reach, and so that's on page 9 of the proposed ordinance. That's section G, subsection 3, and I would like to change that language from licensed security from licensed security company to state licensed private party operator security company, which would be require them to do background checks, among other things. And then the other proposed change that I would enact. And these the two other changes that I'm asking for is essentially to try to get rid of the two largest conflicts that we have. Can you show your boundary map that you've articulated for downtown? So I would request that we change Section A, subsection 6, which now reads any parcel on Chapala Street between Sola and Highway 101, to read Section 6, any parcel on Chapala Street, whatever, or Haley and Gutierrez between Chapala and Santa Barbara. So to expand that line over to either Anacapa or Santa Barbara Street is essentially what I'm talking about. The line that's the west of State area, I would want to expand that to 1 or 2 blocks so that that area is that Santa Barbara?
Yes,
Or-
this is State, Anacapa, Santa Barbara. And let me just go back to the citywide map. So are you suggesting instead of having State Street being the dividing line between east and west would be more like Anacapa or Santa Barbara Street?
Yes. And the reason for doing that would be so that whatever the one dispensary that ends up being the west of downtown doesn't have to locate on Chapala, because right now essentially they would have to locate on Chapala. I would want to give the opportunity for it not to locate on Chapala if there was an available parcel. Do you see my point? So that it could locate on, for instance, the areas that are pink right there, or there. That would be my intent. And if you want to ask me about that, staff, please.
No, I think I get it.
You get it?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then the last one is that I do think that in order to eliminate the conflict between the application at 2 West Mission and the Board of Education and the conflict, hopefully the conflict on the Chapala Street area, I would also want to see if we could create a situation where either permits could be amended mid-process so that they could change where the location of the permit is, or that we could transfer for a permit. And I would like some advice on how we could do that, because I believe if we could change or allow the amendment of a permit application, that we might be able to eliminate these two large conflicts, either the amendment of a permit application or if a permit is granted, then require them to change their location within a certain amount of time or something like that. Do you have any advice on whether we could amend the permit application if they're in the middle of an appeal or anything like that, Mr. Wiley?
Well, Mr. Chair, there's nothing in this ordinance that prevents that now. Anyone can amend their application anytime. It's their application.
But could they amend it with a different location, or would you would normally require them to submit a new application, right?
No.
Okay. You guys got to work this out.
I mean, we're writing this ordinance. This ordinance is what it is. Anyone can come in and say, oh, I want to change the address. The question is, do they have to go back to the beginning? And yeah, they got to go back to the beginning.
And my point is, because we are threatening a moratorium, and because we are capping, we are essentially making these operators stick with their current location, come hell or high water, because they might decide, well, maybe I don't want to, fight the residents at Chapala Street, or maybe I don't want to fight the Board of Education, but if they could find a new location. But if they find a new location, they would have to start over, and essentially, because we're capping or enacting a moratorium, they would not be able to move forward. So what I'm suggesting is we've created a perverse incentive in the conglomeration of measures, that each these measures taken as an individual entity is a good idea, but altogether it's forcing operators to run headlong against the interests of some of their neighbors. And I would like to eliminate that problem if it's possible.
Well, I just go back to it's their application. They can amend it anytime they want. Are we going to say you can have an application go through the Planning Commission for one location and then before you pull the permit, change the address? No, I don't think so. Are we going to say the same thing for the staff hearing officer, which is a noticed public hearing? It would make absolutely no sense to have a public hearing and then allow someone to change their address after the public hearing and not require them to go back to the public hearing stage. So they can change their application. The question may become whether they have to file a new application fee or not.
The real question has to do, Mr. Wiley, with whether they, given that we're limiting the number in the city, whether they lose their status in that listing. An example: you have two that have recently been approved and have gone through the extensive process. They are at a point where, if they were to find a location that would not violate the concerns that had given them this difficulty, they would very likely be able to do so. For them to lose that status in the processing and go back to the beginning of the line, that's the issue. They've qualified all the way to the point of getting a permit, meaning that they meet all of our requirements, except for one, the specific location. So you and I had a conversation about their being able to amend their application for a new location, recognizing they would probably have to go through some form of process, like you just described, to deal with the specifics of that new location. But for them to lose all priority in the system of that we have right now in terms of being considered, that's the concern.
I'm not following, to be honest with you. It's just, I don't know what...
I think
if they become number 8, 9, or 10 in the list,
priority, do you get to say you applied for one address, someone else has already applied for an address a few doors down, yet they can change and, you know, I'm not following at all.
Well, okay, so I'll be very specific. I would be I know we're talking in general policy terms here, but it would seem to me very much like a pharmacy finding another location that was not in the mixed-use structure after they've gone through all of this should have that opportunity. And the same thing for the group that was at 2 Mission Street, that given specifically, I mean in particular, given their circumstances where the city it had all been vetted, and now we have this revocation after the fact, so that they should be given an opportunity to find another location if they could, and not lose their place in line. This is a critical part.
That's what I don't know what you mean by not losing
well,
place
because
in line. What do you mean? They don't have to have another public hearing on that?
No. I'm talking about the when there's a limited number of dispensaries and once we're done this, there may very well be a limited number of dispensaries in the city of Santa Barbara. And what we're addressing is, if somebody has gotten that far through the process, do they have to go back and be considered as if they had never applied before, which could very well take them completely out of the game, and yet they've been a responsible participant all the way up to this point.
Let me be clear. You're going to tell us how you want the amortization to work.
Okay.
You're going to tell us how you want the moratorium to work.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know the answers. You're going to tell us.
Okay.
So these things haven't been decided.
Got it. Thank you.
So
to have a process where someone can just change their address, and you're just going to have people throw any old address in and say, I want to get on the books tomorrow with any address. So that doesn't make any sense.
No.
Well, so what I'm
we're going to need some help on this one.
Is if we can provide a mechanism by which they still have to go through all the hearings required of a new permit, but that for purposes of the cap, that they be treated, the cap or moratorium or whatever, that they be treated as a existing application.
If you want to tell us that as of November 24th, everybody that's got a completed application will be exempt from something, that's how we'll write it. And that's sort of what I'm hearing. But
I don't want them to be exempt from something. I want them to us to treat it as an existing application for purposes of the cap. So I suppose we could put it in the portion that articulates the cap and say, for purposes of the cap, any change of location is considered an existing permit application.
I would just reemphasize, we have not had this conversation about how amortization period is going to work with respect to existing. We're going to have different categories. We've got some, I believe, maybe one or two dispensaries that opened prior to any city ordinance a couple years ago. We've got some that opened under the ordinance of March of 2008. Yeah. And we've got some that are pending right now, pending applications. We've got some on appeal. All different circumstances. We have to deal with them if we're going to have an amortization period and answer the question. If we're going to have a cap of 7, same question. How does that cap of 7 apply to existing permitted ones, existing applications? We just haven't had the conversation yet.
Mr. Cotto.
Thank you, Chair Williams. There is a parallel, though, that we have going under the current ordinance, right? Because right now, you're not allowed to have 2 dispensaries within 500 feet of each other, right? So whoever gets in first, whatever in is, gets to be there. Then whoever comes another one within 500 feet gets locked out, right? We had 2 applications come in. One is at 302 West Mission, and one is, in fact, right across the street at 234. East Haley, 234 East Haley, right across the street at 302 East Haley. 234 actually came in first, but the 302, what we decided would be the fair way to do it was whoever was deemed complete first got to go first, got to get their chance to be approved first, right? So 302, even though it came in after 234, was deemed complete because it was just a more complete application. It got to go first. It's on appeal. 234 can't actually move forward until 302 has been either approved or denied, and that's a matter of fairness. Who was first? And what your question is, and I've had this conversation with several of the dispensary owners, is it fair for someone like the pharmacy who goes through their process and either gets denied or risks getting denied to go in and be able to keep their place in line and not let anyone else in that geographic area go first while they come up with a whole new plan for a whole new tenant space? That just doesn't seem fair, because now we have someone else in line that's complete and ready to go, and so then they have to wait because this one is.
I guess, Mr. Cotto, the difference is that they were approved, and so was the other one that I mentioned, and that's the distinction. They weren't denied; they were actually approved. And so then subsequent to that, one of them still isn't resolved, and the other one, actually, neither one of them is 100% resolved. So both of them did get an approval for their locations. That's the distinction I'm speaking to.
Chair Williams, Councilmember House, I agree with that, but it got an approval which is on appeal, which means it's not approved. That's the pharmacy. 2 West Mission did get approved, and the permit was revoked, and that is unfortunate. But to let them go, I mean, it just seems to me to let them stay in their point of the line because of the cap isn't fair to the other people who have done their due diligence as well, and they're waiting their turn. And they can't have a turn because we're saying these people can just kind of put everybody else on hold while they come up with a new location.
I guess I'm okay with that. And my intent is because the conflict over these 2 places is because we are changing the rules midstream, right? In both cases, we are changing the rules midstream. Both of those conflicts are ones in which I can totally see the interests of the residents. I can see the interests of the collective, and they are both incidents that are going to end in litigation if we do not find an easier way to deal with it. And in my mind, providing the opportunity, the safety valve, we have created the conditions under which these 2 parties are ready to, to kill each other, basically, because we've created a set of restrictions under which their only chance for success is for them to fight each other tooth and nail. I'm suggesting that a safety valve would be that they are required to go through all the permitting process again, but for purposes of the cap and spatial requirements, they are considered as an existing application. So I would like to make that change, and if you have any suggestion as to how to make that change, that would be helpful. Mr. House, you have some.
Well, I've got some suggestions on the ordinance revisions that we talked about, so maybe we should start doing that more in the interest of time. First of all, I want to commend that we're referencing state law throughout and identifying in the appropriate places health and safety code, and also at the end for the approval. So I just want to say I'm glad. I was looking and trying to understand how we're founding this in state law, and it appears that we are doing it and doing it adequately. Let's see. On E. Okay, let's go to the syntax and make sure we remove the word either because it doesn't refer to anything. This is on the top of page 3.
Mr. Chair, I'll double check that, but I don't think, I will check that.
Yeah.
I think the last and should be an or. I don't agree with Mr. Weston.
Oh, there's another part?
You would have a hole so big in this ordinance you could drive a truck through it.
Well, then what does it intend? So help us understand. The person to whom...
It does intend that you be a primary caregiver in order to be a dispensary.
Oh, and so that was thank you. That was my next point in my notes. And I don't know that I agree with that. I was trying to figure out how, and let me tell you why. If you go to
that
page...
we have a choice. I think that
well,
the state law requires that.
All right, well, let's go to page 2 for a second then for consistency at D. And in the middle of D, where it identifies the consistency with Health and Safety Code, section 11362.7a, it says, and where medical cannabis is made available to or distributed by or to a primary caregiver or qualified patient. And one of the things I noticed, that kind of language is consistent throughout the entire ordinance, which it distinguishes between the place of distribution, which in this case would be a qualified dispensary provider of some sort, primary caregiver, and a qualified patient. So there's another few times in here where it references, for instance, that whom the dispensary is serving could be a patient or a primary caregiver. And it's making a distinction which appears to be found in the Health and Safety Code. So I would like to make sure that we resolve that, and if it is possible for a dispensary not to be the primary caregiver, we should be clear about that and not add to state law. On the other hand, if primary caregiver is, as in your brief it suggested, and it may not be an either or, but it says provides for 3 things. There were 3 different things with or there. It was health, support, I'm trying to remember, what was it? Safety, and then it says or housing. So it provides some of those 3 things. So it's number 1, which is health, the second is safety, or housing. If that's true, it's clear that we need to make sure that our references to state law are clear and that we're not having some expectation, for instance, that a dispensary is providing all 3 of those. That it's providing whatever it provides as part of its bundle of services that it provides. One would be health referrals and health support. Another one might be safety support. Another might be references or referrals or assistance with housing. But my goal is to make sure that what we have here is truly consistent with the state law. That's my goal, and not to add to it.
Mr. Chair, we'll double check that, but that's the way this was written. That's the intent. We can't change state law, so it is what it is. I will double check the references.
And specifically the one that Mr. Weston cites is
I think that last and should have been an or,
1136.765.
and that would explain the either.
I get it.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yep.
All right, well, then we're going to be looking at that again. I've got a couple more here to look at then. And on C1, let's see, where is that? That's on page 5. I just had keep the 500 feet. I know that Mr. Cato put 1,000 on that map, but I think 500 is sufficient to do the job, and it's already in the language, and it makes a, and then I agree with the added reference there, unless a park is separated from the proposed dispensary location by U.S. Highway 101, which would effectively allow the other end of Chapala Street there, right next to the freeway, across from the fig tree, which we had discussed before as an issue. And then on the next one, what is here? And then C5, let's go down to C5. Well, the old C5 stands, and that's the one I think a number of people have had concerns about with the mixed use. I think we've already addressed that issue with regards to on a parcel being used as a mixed-use residential commercial use condominium project. At the time of the adoption of this ordinance, that's now being added in there. I agree with that. And then now the new C5, on a parcel located within 1,000 feet of a legally permitted homeless shelter facility. And first of all, that wasn't our intent when we talked about this before, and we were speaking specifically of the what's called the recovery zone around Casa Esperanza. Now I think we should discuss this just a little bit. I'm a little concerned that if we then generally apply that throughout the city for any facility whatsoever that could consider itself a recovery facility of some sort, that is completely not in my intent here, and I don't want to open up that Pandora's box. So if we can have this specifically reference that area over there near Cacique and that circle around that, great. But if that opens up us having to do this citywide, for every single place that could call itself a recovery facility, I'd prefer us to take this out.
I agree with that. I don't think we should be doing spatial requirements on stuff that we have not even mapped. I mean, that's like throwing, blindfolding and throwing a dart at the board. If we just extend this to any, caregiving facility, they're all over the city. I mean, will come in the same thing. We think in our minds that a homeless shelter is this big place where there's a lot of people, but there are a ton of very small shelters all over the city. And so we don't know what the effects of this would be. So I think, and if you look at the tape, it's not what we asked for. We asked for specifically within the recovery zone of Casa Esperanza, which was 1,000 feet from Casa Esperanza. Mr. Martel.
We can change that to the address if you want.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that's better.
But Chair and committee, a lot of the complaints I get are from such places as like the Salvation Army and some of the sober livings, and so that's the complaint, that they don't want to be next to.
Sure, but if you guys want us to, if you guys are suggesting that, you need to map that. Okay, you guys can't give us a spatial requirement without us being able to examine the ramifications of that, right? So, we may be back over here in January just to change all this language to collectives. So we could make a suggestion at that time, but I just think
in which case collectives, which could be anywhere in the city, in which we have very limited recourse to. My goal is for us to get regulations here that are sufficient to make sure those who need access to this have access, safe access, and those who don't are not allowed in. And so this number 5 may not actually be necessary. So if there's a way to do this, it doesn't suddenly expand it across the whole city, I'm okay with that, but if not, I'd prefer to see it removed. Mr. Wiley, can we do that where we are specific to this particular area of town, or do we have to have this be a general proposition?
I would suggest if you just want Casa Esperanza, we don't use the name because they
could go out of
change
business.
their name. We just use the address.
Okay, thank you. And I think there was a suggestion about a language. I like this concept of a qualified dispensing provider. I think the idea, it gets really more to it. Just a dispensary seems so, we can talk about that more later, but I think the idea of that these are qualified dispensing providers really does speak directly to whom we're addressing. Somebody mentioned the funk zone, and I don't know how that maps out. Mr. Cato, is there some way we can just look and see what that would mean, if anything?
Councilmember House, do you mean the funk zone or the fun zone? Those two sound a lot alike. The funk zone is below Highway 101, and it's not allowed right now. Let's see if I can get a map that's even close. Well, this is probably the closest we can get unless I go to the citywide map. But here's
Gray
Highway
and
101,
Anacapa, right.
and this whole thing. This is the funk zone down here, and they're currently not allowed there
Because of,
because the zoning. We said C2 and CM plus certain specific areas, and this wasn't one of them.
and that's OC2.
There's HRC2, Hotel Related and Commerce 2 zone, and there's also the OC, or Ocean Related Commercial Zone, both in this area. The HRC2 is primarily along State Street, and the OC is kind of behind there.
Mm-hmm.
And we took your direction that you didn't want to expand it to Cottage Hospital or Coast Village Road to mean you didn't want an expansion anywhere, which is why we didn't.
I just hadn't thought about the OC zone, which is the one that we had gone, we fought with the Coastal Commission to finally get and move it away from hotels, to move it so that we could preserve this funky kind of interesting mix of uses down there. It seems I would be interested in discussing that. And then ADA requirements, somebody else mentioned that. I think those are just required as part of our building code, right? Access, ADA requirements, when somebody provides a use of this sort?
That's just a building code
Right.
issue. It's, we don't change that.
Okay.
It is what it is. Yeah.
Alrighty, and just trying to catch some of these questions people had along the way as they spoke, this suggestion of Department of Justice clearance, that's what you were talking about in the way that the security, that's different. That would be different. There was a suggestion of a Department of Justice clearance of owners and operators. How far have we gotten on that kind of thing?
Williams, Councilmember House, the ordinance doesn't actually say that. What the ordinance says, and let me point you to it, it is... it's on page 6. It's 2880070A, about the middle of the page, criminal history.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who works in a dispensary is not allowed to have any felonies or be on probation or parole for the sale or distribution of controlled substances. The way we do that is we make all the applicants and their employees go to the police department, register for something called a live scan, which is where they give the fingerprints, and then the fingerprints go out over to the state Department of Justice, I think, and then they come back with, yes, they'll come back with a criminal history. Captain Martell actually reviews every single one of those and then clears that person for employment, or clears them for association with the dispensary. So even though it doesn't say Department of Justice, we do that already. That's how we make sure that this particular requirement is adhered to.
All right, very good. I think that answers that. Let's see. Okay, good. No, I think that gets the ones that I saw. I might come up with something else in a minute.
Okay. And can I, so the specific changes that you are asking for to the text, again, let's just give it, cite the locations of that text change.
Well, we discussed E and the language there. Mr. Wiley's going to help us with that on the primary care consistency with state law. C, there was no change to C1, and then there was the C5, and that was the issue that we just discussed about the recovery zone. I think we've handled that. And I did suggest for discussion beginning to use this little bit more apt term, perhaps qualified dispensary provider. Maybe it just adds extra words, but I think it really speaks to whom we're speaking, what we're talking about.
Well, should we just change that to collective? I mean, maybe it's not the intent of the council.
I'm not clear. Are you suggesting that the word permittee, that it's a defined term now, would be changed to qualified? What was it?
I see permittee. I get it. It was just qualified dispensary provider. I'm just getting a little bit closer to what we're dealing with here. It's somebody who's been qualified. They are dispensing and they're providing to the people in their collective.
I
You
think
certainly change the word permittee to qualified dispensary provider.
Wouldn't it just be better just to change the dispensary to that, not permittee? I think there's occurrences of the word dispensary, and the question is what to call that if we're trying to move away from the storefront dispensary model that's not a collective. Should we start using that term of art?
Whatever you'd prefer.
Maybe it's just a matter of It's not that important. I just really, it's not that important. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
And then all the rest of what I had to say has been already covered in here. So
Okay. So we have the suggestions. Do you have any proposed changes, Mr. Francisco?
No.
Okay. We have the proposed changes to the address for Casa Esperanza, that's C5. Mr. Campanella brought up the question of C4 being within a mixed-use residential. That's, I think, something that we probably should. Does the committee have any opinion on that, or
Mr. Chair, the term parcel is a defined term in the zoning ordinance, and it's referring to the real property.
Okay.
We can clarify this if you want. I don't really think it's necessary.
Okay. Thank you. My suggestion, remember, was A6 and the security amendment, and the question of whether we should allow applications to go through the process a second time, but still, for purposes of the cap, be treated as an existing application. So does the committee members agree with those, disagree with those? Mr. Francisco?
I think it's opening up a can of worms.
Which one?
The idea of somehow once someone is in the process of applying for a permit, that if something goes wrong, they magically stay in place until everything's finally worked out.
Well, I think it's because we've changed the process, and I'm trying to essentially diffuse the situation at Chapala and Mission. That's the intent, so that we do not have these people at odds. I mean, does staff have a suggestion on?
Well, at least in the case of the Mission Street, we didn't change anything.
We didn't.
No.
The Planning Commission did, right?
No, the Planning Commission didn't change anything either. I mean, you can
They
say
granted a permit and then revoked it.
Well, we as a city had a procedure in place. We, as a city, were ignorant of a fact, but we didn't change the procedure in any way.
I don't need to debate the original case. So
not a debate.
So you're against that one. What about the security requirement for a private party operator security company? That's G3.
I think what's in the existing language myself is sufficient. But.
Okay. Well, I think we need to have the higher standard. And what about the suggestion on A6? Because my intent here is so that a dispensary does not have to locate on Chapala, because that corridor just about is almost all Chapala, and would include just east of State on those three streets if we allowed it.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask? I wasn't clear on that last one. Did you mean to include State Street in that?
No, it would be A6, changing A6 to allow parcels on Haley and Gutierrez as far east as either, I guess, Anacapa, because Santa Barbara would all be within the distance from a park anyway. So up to Anacapa.
Oh, I'm lost then. Are you talking about A6 or A7?
A6. Any parcel on Chapala Street between Sola Street and Highway 101, or Haley and Gutierrez between Chapala and Anacapa.
So
that would be my suggested change.
So any parcel on Chapala between. Tell me again.
It right now reads any parcel on Chapala between Sola Street and Highway 101, and I would change that to or Haley and Gutierrez between Chapala and Anacapa.
You're not referring to 7 then?
No, this is parceled out so that there is 7
Doesn't
different
overlap
zones.
with the other one.
I want to move that line from State Street to Anacapa, the line behind you, Mr. Wiley. That line, I want to move that to Anacapa.
So whatever language gets us over to Anacapa.
you are, but you're not including State Street.
No, I'm not suggesting
Okay, you
to
see,
change
so any parcel on Chapala, Anacapa, or Santa Barbara Street, between what streets north and south?
I mean, the language as is what's
Well-
there unless we change that.
Okay. So any parcel on Chapala Street, Anacapa Street, or Santa Barbara Street between Sola and US 101?
My specific intent is to put the parcels that are on Haley and Gutierrez between Chapala and Anacapa on that location. So those areas that are now pink, that are sandwiched between see those ones?
Yeah, well, I think that would accomplish it unless you want to move it up to Haley or Gutierrez instead of US 101.
Okay.
I mean, you tell me.
You just want to move the line over there to Anacapa Street, right?
Right.
Okay, maybe
That's
the staff can do that.
Anacapa or Santa Barbara? I'm sorry.
Anacapa. It doesn't make a difference because if we moved it to Santa Barbara, it'd all be within 500 feet of something.
Yeah.
So saying Anacapa is, I think, more intellectually honest.
Now, what about the see that yellow group down there near on the other side of the freeway from Gray, over and right above that?
Yeah, that may be one more
so
reason
take it,
to put
take
it
it to
at
Santa Barbara.
Anacapa.
No, take it to Santa Barbara Street, and then you've got the line for the 2 different sections will be the same line. Is that correct, Mr. Cato? You'd have the one group that would be on the east side, if you will, of Santa Barbara Street, and the other would be on the west side of Santa Barbara Street, if you move the line there.
Yes.
Yeah, so 6 and 7 would divide on Santa
And where's
Barbara.
the existing applications?
Existing applications, there's one approved up on Olive Street. There's 302 East Haley, which is here, and 234 East Haley, which is there.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, no. That's them right there. That's the 2 Haley ones.
Okay. So it doesn't matter except for where the yellow is.
Let's just say Santa Barbara Street, so then the same line divides
Sure.
the 2 different sections, and
Okay.
staff can work out the words.
So that's agreeable to everyone.
I don't disagree with your more stringent restrictions on the security.
Okay, so that's two votes for the security change, and specifically what that is just changing the language from security company to from state licensed security company to state licensed private party operator security company. Mr. Cotto.
I have a question back on locations. Actually, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Just to clarify, if we move this line from State Street to Santa Barbara Street, then if we, okay, and I heard one committee member say go back to the 500 feet from schools and not the 1,000. So that will change.
We haven't talked about
Okay,
the
we haven't talked
spatial.
about
Mr.
that.
House did, but
if-
the rest
if
of
we-
us have not.
As it's mapped right now, just so you understand, as it's mapped right now, the only portions that are allowed east of State Street are these. If you move this line two blocks over, then basically nothing's allowed east of State unless we change some things.
Nothing's allowed?
Because of all the different radii and what have you.
Oh, right.
It's just blocked out. Right. So,
But we haven't. We don't yet have 2 votes.
Correct. I was just
changing the spatial requirements yet.
Right.
So
I want to point some of these things out because when we have to write this up and map it, we just want to make sure exactly what you're talking about.
right. And for my part, I'm not going to. I basically have a problem with spatial requirements, period, because all it does is box in people to a certain areas and creates concentrations like we saw in the Milpas corridor, which to me is what part of the problem that we're dealing with right now. But I understand intellectually that we shouldn't have these close to schools. I think the 500 is probably adequate. I might be willing to do that farther, but 1,000 is so much that you pretty much continue to box people into smaller and smaller areas, and I think that's a mistake. So I might be willing to do 750, but until I can see that mapped, I'm not gonna go for it. So I think 500, unless we can see a map of 750, is where I'm going. So you understand that we are changing this to have the address at Casa Esperanza. We're making the change to Section A, subsection 6, to move the line, and we're making the change to the security requirement to have a higher level of certification, basically background checks for the security officers, by changing the language to a state-licensed private party operator security company.
Mr. Chair, on
Yes,
that last
Mr.
one, are you saying that term private party operator is a defined term in state law?
It is, and I want you to check it, make sure I get it right, Mr. Wiley. But it's my intent to make it the higher threshold of background check. All those amendments understood by staff and the city attorney?
I believe so.
Any clarification needed?
Well, we haven't talked about the amortization. Okay,
let's talk about amortization. So, what do we do with this new category of non-conforming? Is your basic question?
Right. We've got, and we've got to remember, we deal with permitted and people who have completed applications. Do you want to treat them differently? I mean, one simple approach is to say, this ordinance is what it is, and everybody's got 6 months to get re-permitted under this new ordinance. That's one way to do it. You may not consider that fair, or the other people who are already been in the process may not consider that fair, but it has the beauty of simplicity, at least. The existing ordinance had a 1-year amortization period, or no, I'm sorry, it was 2 years, I think, 3 years. There's just a lot of different ways you can do this.
Mr. Chair, I suggest that we take the simple road. First of all, we had 6 months that we were talking about for those that were in the early, the existing non-conforming. And so we've decided, at least straw vote level, we've decided to do that, and we're moving in that direction. For the next group, from March 2008, the ones that have come in since the ordinance was, okay, and I was just thinking through all the changes we've made here. They're pretty doable. I was trying to think of what would they do? We've got the ones that are permitted in particular now, Mr. Cato. You've got that list. Thank you.
Well, specifically, the question would be issues. What do you do with the fact that there's now would be 2 permitted dispensaries all in one area where there's only supposed to be 1?
Oh no, we had already decided that would be an attrition. I thought we discussed that as an attrition solution. That whomever goes out of business first, and that's just it, leaves the one standing, and that resolves that issue just by attrition. That was the concept.
That's my recollection from our debate before, is that it would be non-conforming in the sense that all existing uses would be non-conforming, meaning once they come back for a remodel or for a new location, they would have to come into conformance with.
And then these other requirements that we've added here, I'm just seeing. I mean, this increased level of security clearance that we just discussed, and it seems to me that the simple approach that Mr. Wiley started off with in this moment in time would be probably the best one. I'm just going to put that forward for discussion. I'm trying to see any great onerous problem that would creep up on that, and I don't see it. I don't see one.
So essentially, I think what we're saying is that all of the logistical requirements of a dispensary would have to come into conformance within 6 months, and the spatial requirements essentially would be non-conforming in the older sense of the word, which is that they are dismissed by attrition.
Well, for the ones that were approved.
Right.
For the others, they're just going through the process still. Yeah, and I don't know. I think it was pretty clear that I agreed with the idea of coming up with some way to deal with the application on Chapala Street for a new location and the other one if they wanted to. Maybe we should put a time limit on it or something, but just give a window of opportunity for them to not lose their status in our processing, and then to find a new location. But maybe at some point we let it go, but give them that opportunity. I think that's an important thing for me out of our conversation today.
Does staff have a suggestion about how to handle that?
Well, maybe. I just thought of something. So the reason that the order in line is important, I guess, is because of the cap, right? So we have like the west of State Street geographic area in which only one would be allowed under the new ordinance, right? And it's all a question of who gets to be that one, right? Does it get to be the pharmacy? Does it get to be one of the others that are in line? And I think what I'm hearing you say is that you'd want to make an exception to the cap for a specific dispensary applicant?
No, no.
Allow them
For
to
the purposes of the cap, the one that's considered first would if they're that they would continue to be considered first for purposes of the cap. That the first ones applying this, if they attempt to change the location of their application.
So essentially allowing, for example, the pharmacy to...
I still just want one west of Santa Barbara Street. One.
Right. But basically somehow allowing everybody in line to be on hold while the pharmacy gets a new location and processes that application.
Right. And the 2 West Mission.
Right.
I just think that this is the cleanest way to handle a very messy situation. I admit that it's still messy, but it's cleaner than the alternatives.
Can we put that on a time limit so that it's not a, I mean, we're using 6 months for this amortization. Maybe we create a 6-month window of opportunity for them if they want to do it.
Is 6 months enough for them to process an application?
Yes, it is. The problem is that we have Permit Streamlining Act timelines on the other ones as well. So once they're deemed complete, they have to move forward unless there's a moratorium. And again, the moratorium could change all of this. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Right.
But, so I was just trying to get clear what you wanted. I think I understand what you want, whether it's legal or whether all of, I don't know. But
I honestly don't understand what you want.
What we want,
and I couldn't even begin to.
Maybe it's okay. So maybe it's not. Maybe this conversation just isn't in the context of our discussion for this ordinance. We have this. The ordinance. We've got it pretty well tied up here, with a bow with some questions that you're going to help us resolve. I was under the impression that if somebody had gotten, in these cases, somebody has gotten an approval, they've met all of our qualifications under the existing ordinance, and they've come up to this particular point where the circumstances have actually put them in a very awkward position, and it's one that seemed to me like we wanted to, of all the kinds of dispensaries that there could be, that would be the kind that has gone through our processes and rigorously abiding by all those things, and having had those approvals, to have them have an opportunity to come to our staff and say, well, we've found a place that doesn't bump up against that particular problem that put us out, that they should have an opportunity to process that. And it sounds like they have an opportunity to, but with this limitation that we have, they're gonna completely go back to the beginning of the entire process, and I guess that's the rub right there. That's the issue.
So maybe I could articulate it like this, Ms. Riley. We could stop processing any other applications in those two zones until the first applicant has an opportunity to change their application and move it and have a up or down vote on its merits.
I don't know how we can do that. That's a moratorium, and that's
We're going to have a moratorium anyway. I mean, you know.
Well, number one, I think it's a mistake to try to draft something for two particular locations.
We're already drafting something for one specific location
but legal
in
to
this.
applications, legally, that's very suspect. Zoning ordinances are not supposed to be about individual applications. Number two, they did not get an approval. Our process is what it is, and you don't have an approval until you're through the end of the process. And both of those were basically suspended after the staff hearing officer decision.
I'm sorry, I was under the impression that they both had actually gotten an approval. One was beginning their improvements on the facility, and the other one
approval never got finalized. They were both suspended within the 10-day appeal period to the Planning Commission. And, you know, I don't support the proposition that we owe someone something when they didn't get through the entire process.
Okay.
They like to say that
status quo is that they can reapply, or they can even amend an application at this point. Can they do that and come through with a new location? They can bring forth all the body of everything they've got and do their very best to get through the system, and just they take their place in line.
And
like
then they
start.
start. Yeah, they start from the beginning.
I guess the problem I'm having, and I do mean it's a drafting problem, is you're trying to have us draft something special for two applicants, and I just don't know how that gets done.
We already drafted something specially for in one case, which was Chapala. So if you had an objection to that, then you should have registered that.
We're just dealing with the existing mixed-use situation, but frankly, we missed the first time around when we were looking at that ordinance. It even came up briefly, and we said, "Oh, that shouldn't be an issue."
Okay.
But you know, I just don't support the
I can make a distinction. I understand. I get the distinction between the ordinance that we're doing and this other issue that we're now discussing. So I'd like us to move this ordinance along and in its revised fashion to see, where does it go from here? It goes to Planning Commission next, yes. Right? And so we take this, so we send this draft on to the Planning Commission with the revisions that we just discussed, and we get to hear them, and it comes back to City Council directly after that, right? It doesn't come through us.
Well, that's the plan, yeah. You could certainly have it brought back to you after the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, the whole point is for them to review it and to suggest changes to the council if they feel changes are appropriate. So that would definitely be something we'll need to discuss at the council with the Planning Commission input.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm not to add a whole extra layer, but I do think it would be good for us to see it when it comes back from Planning Commission, and then send it to City Council with all those things put together. And so that's my motion. My motion is to move this with these revisions we discussed today to the Planning Commission and have it come back to us once more just before it goes to City Council as a whole.
Let's see. What would be the timing of that? When would this go to Planning Commission, Mr. Cotto?
Most likely in January. That we go to the Planning Commission. I think it's too late to get it on the December 17th agenda for the Planning Commission. In fact, it is too late to get it on there, especially with the holidays, and then there's the furlough the last 2 weeks of the month. So I can't imagine it being on any time before January 14th.
Mr. House, I don't really understand the reason for bringing it back to us.
Neither do I.
From the Planning Commission.
I don't think
it's going to go. It's going to go to the council.
Yeah, we can look at the language at council.
Okay, I was just trying to spare council from doing the kind of nitpicking we get to do here, and to make sure that it really is all the loose ends might be tied up. But that's all. That was my intention.
Mr. Cotto.
Yeah, sorry to beat a dead horse, sort of, but I just want to make sure that the mapping that we saw does not exactly reflect the language in the ordinance. It's more broad than in some ways and more restrictive in others. And if you like the actual language of the ordinance, we can prepare maps and take that to the Planning Commission. If you like the maps as amended by the Ordinance Committee, that we'd have to amend the language in the ordinance to reflect the mapping.
I think it's really critical that the maps are accurately reflecting what we've decided here, and not go further or be less than. In other words, they be an accurate reflection as much as you can of what we're sending on to Planning Commission.
Okay, so it sounds like you want to go with the ordinance language and not with the mapping, because they are different in some ways.
Well, I mean, given that they're a land use body, what they should see is they should see maps that are consistent with the language that we're recommending.
Okay.
I think it's too confusing otherwise.
Yeah, it's just too hard, and it begs questions that aren't even coming up. We want to keep it focused on the work we've done so far.
And where is it in the language? Well, no, let's pass it.
So I'll amend my motion to have this go to Planning Commission, and thereafter to go to City Council for consideration.
I'll second the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, and thank you for bearing through, 5 hearings? Or is that now the 5th hearing? Thank you so much.